How many of us can't take a compliment? Or when somebody tells us what to do, or even tells us that we're doing something wrong, we get upset. Now, I know I can struggle with that. And that comes out of a sense of pride or even false humility. It's just a bad attitude. And last Sunday, I talked about the story of Jonah. And out of that story, I discussed God's mercy. My second point was that our attitude matters. Our attitude matters when we receive God's mercy. Now, in the story of Jonah, there were two characters that I focused on. The first, obviously, was Jonah, and then the second was the king of the Ninevites. And the difference between these two characters is that Jonah had to be humbled by God. The king of the Ninevites was humbled himself before God. Now, we see Jonah was told by God to go to Nineveh, but he didn't. He ran away, went to Tarshish, he went on a boat, and then God sent a storm, and then Jonah got thrown overboard. And then God sent a fish to swallow Jonah. And finally, in the belly of the fish, Jonah was humbled by God and realized, I should do what God told me to do. And then when he goes into Nineveh and proclaims, in 40 days you're going to be overthrown, the king of the Ninevites had a much different response than Jonah did. He humbled himself. He declared a fast in the whole city of Nineveh, saying that nobody was going to eat or drink. And he wore sackcloth, and everybody wore sackcloth. And basically what he said was, maybe if we do this, God will change his mind. God won't pour out his wrath on Nineveh. And that's the big difference between these two characters, is that Jonah had to be humbled. The king of the Ninevites humbled himself. Jonah was receiving God's mercy over and over, but wasn't fully getting it. The king of the Ninevites received God's mercy in full. And then the crazy thing about the story of Jonah is after Jonah being in the belly of the whale, we think, oh, he's changed. But in chapter 4, we see otherwise. Right after Jonah proclaimed to the Ninevites, you're going to be overthrown, and then they repented and God changed his mind and didn't pour out his wrath. This is what happens. It says, but to Jonah this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord, isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live. But the Lord replied, is it right for you to be angry? Now, Jonah wasn't receiving God's full mercy. God was showing him mercy after mercy after mercy. Even though Jonah ran away, God was there. God was there giving him grace. And God brought him back and showed grace to this great amount of people, the Ninevites. But Jonah was still upset. God's message wasn't fully getting through to Jonah. His attitude was pushing God further and further away. Whereas the attitude of the Ninevites and the king of Nineveh was pulling God closer so that they could receive the fullness of God's mercy. Now, my challenge to you this week is, what's holding you back from receiving God's mercy in full? What bad attitude do you have? Because our attitude sometimes separates us from God. Jonah was separating himself from God. God was there with him through everything. So this week, I just want to challenge you to search your heart, to search your mind, to search your soul, and just ask yourself, do I have any attitudes that are keeping God's mercy from me?